Brooklyn Independent Television.
Welcome to Brooklyn Elected Officials. My name is Joy Simmons. I'm a judicial delegate in the 40th Assembly District in Brooklyn. I'm also the Chief of Staff for Councilman Charles Barron. And I am here with our wonderful guests. I'm very excited to be here. We all are excited to be here. So we have Inez Barron, Assemblywoman Inez Barron, who is the Assemblywoman of the 40th Assembly District in Brooklyn, which covers East New York. She's a fearless fighter in Albany. She's been in the Department of Education for 37 years, yes, and a teacher for 18 of those years, yes, and also served as a principal and an assistant to the superintendent. Yes, and Ms. Inez Barron has actually sponsored a very key piece of legislation in the Brooklyn community regarding Starlight City, and that was to keep Starlight City affordable for 30 years. So that's a tremendous, tremendous accomplishment. So we also have, yes, we also have Councilman Charles Barron. Councilman Barron has started his activism, his Black empowerment activism as a member of the Black Panther Party many years ago. Yes, and also was a part of the Black United Front with Reverend Herbert Daughtry at the House of the Lord Church, also in Brooklyn. Has been the CEO and founder of the Dynamics of Leadership Corporation, teaching leadership training all over the country, right? Many states all over, and in New York City, college campuses, et cetera, and has developed a beautiful, wonderful, very educational dynamic of leadership curriculum. Councilman Barron is a city council person representing the 42nd Council District, which covers East New York, parts of Brownsville, parts of Canarsie, parts of East Flatbush, correct? And there's a piece of key legislation that was just passed by the state, and also a companion piece of resolution that was passed at the City Council. And you two were some of the only members of both legislative bodies to vote no on this legislation. Assemblywoman, I believe you were one of 8 out of 150 Assembly persons that voted no, the only Black and Latino member. So can you tell us more about what the legislation is about and why you voted no?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk with you today. As you know, New York State has a deficit. And in order to address correcting that deficit, this past budget took a $10 billion deficit reduction plan by reducing services to the Black and Latino, services to those who needed it the most. And projecting to next year, there was a $3.5 billion deficit projected for next year. Presently, we have a surcharge for personal income tax filers that generates about $5 billion. And that surcharge was set to expire at the end of this year. Our hopes were that the governor would continue this surcharge on so-called rich, continue this surcharge that would have yielded a $5 billion plus revenue to address the deficit for next year. That meant had we continued the surcharge that's in place now, we would have had coverage for that deficit and an additional $1.5 billion to talk about restoring some of the services that the present budget cut. In January of this year, my husband, Charles Barron, and I confronted the governor at a gathering and said to him, tax the rich, meaning continue the present surcharge. The governor said he wasn't going to tax the rich, he wasn't going to do that, and in fact, people thought that the year would end and that would sunset that surcharge tax of $5 billion that we've been getting, which means we'd be facing the year looking at a 3.5 deficit. But lo and behold, all of a sudden, out of the blue, we get a call, come to Albany, we're going to address the deficit. I'm going thinking, oh, we're going to continue the millionaire's tax, or at least put into place a plan that the Assembly had, which would have generated about $3 billion. But no, we got general overview of a governor's scheme that would generate $1.9 billion. Well, where is it? How are we going to do this? And he's he's giving a reduction to each of the tax brackets. But if you look at the chart, which we're going to talk about a little more in depth, the richest people get the largest benefit. So whereas those who are making $40,000 will get a reduction of 0.2%, or those making $500,000 will get 0.4%. Those who are making $1 million are getting 2% reduction in what they're presently paying. They're getting a 5 times greater reduction in their taxes than the person who needs it the most. Poor people are going to get maybe $3, $4 more per week when you average it out, whereas those who are making millions are going to get thousands of dollars per week. So he's reducing the tax that they're paying, but the greatest reduction is coming from the rich. And when I did that analysis, I said, no, I can't support this. I can't support this. Because as we go forward into the next year, we're coming in at a deficit. And what do you think is going to happen? It's going to be further reductions in education, in health benefits, in transportation. All of those things that were already cut this year are going to suffer further reductions next year. So I could not, in good analysis, continue to support that kind of measure.
Now, that seems so logical, and it's, you know, I mean, it just seems like something that we all should not support, and not give our right. So what is the rationale, you think, why so many assembly members voted for it? What did they say? Because I'm sure you made
well, perhaps I spoke on it.
Right, told them about what was happening, and
right.
So what was their thinking?
Part of the problem is the process that exists in Albany. It's very secretive. We got the bills on our desk, regardless of what people said. Oh, well, it was discussed lots of times, years in the making. No, not what I saw. What I saw on my desk a half an hour before it was time to vote was not a reflection of what I thought would be beneficial and would start us off at a deficit going forward. And other folks perhaps didn't take the time to analyze it, or perhaps just accepted the presentation that was given without having the documentation to examine. But that wasn't what I did.
Okay, thanks. So on the city council level, the resolution, can you tell us a bit about that and what the responses was on the city level?
First, let me congratulate Assemblywoman Inez Barron. We're sick and tired of sellouts. We're sick and tired of those who lack spine to stand up to this governor. We're sick and tired of political cowards. And I'm going to be straight. There's too many ancient mamas and Uncle Toms shuffling and afraid to say to this governor, we're not going for the okie doke. I mean, I'm going to lay it out here where you can clearly see it. Why would you sit there, skin and grin with somebody, call him the greatest governor ever, smiling, taking pictures with him? He came to announce this thing in Brooklyn at Medgar Evers College. That's a disgrace to the name of Medgar Evers. But we got a president there who's a lackey for the white power structure and will allow himself to be used by that. Now, this is not just a bunch of rhetoric. Here's the facts. This chart here represents what we were going after, and this even fell a little short. We were going after this tax scheme. Working Families Party and others put this together. We worked closely on it. The Freedom Party supported all of this. If you look at it clearly, when you have a state that, one, gives subsidies to the rich, that's welfare, free money to them to develop housing and stuff like that. They get hundreds of millions of dollars. Yankee Stadium to build that, hundreds of millions of dollars of free money. You're in a crisis, cut the subsidies. The other thing they give before they get to this is tax breaks for the rich. When they buy land, you can get land for $1 in the city. Multi-billion-dollar companies getting land for $1 and then building luxury housing on it and a little bit of affordability. That's what they get. Then they have loopholes that need to be closed. You know, instead of being able to, get away with 35% of your contributions, whatever, make it 25% and make them pay that other 10% so that we can get more money in our coffers. You would have about a 20-some-odd billion-dollar surplus every year. But this is the personal income tax surcharge, the PIT surcharge. We said, why don't we do this? Those who are making $500,000 raise their income tax by 2.5%. That would only be 63,000 people. There are 18 million people in this state. That represents 0.8% of the tax filers. And then if you're going and making 1 million, raise it to 3.5. That's only 26.3. If you got 5 million, 5%, only 3,000 and change, 0.04. And if you're making $10 million, 7%, only 1,300 people are making that. That's 0.02%. This is what we get. $6.5 billion every year. So with a $3.5 billion deficit, you'd have $3 billion surplus to really do the right thing. And then if you focus in on this is what we wanted. They didn't do that. This is what...
And this was proposed when?
This was proposed about in 2004.
Okay.
You know, we proposed this and was fighting for it, but we stayed persistent till we got them at least to this. Inez Assemblywoman Barron really did a great job in educating us on putting this together. This tax code in 2008.
Right. So just to be clear, this is what the current proposal, what the legislation that they just voted on, this is what they actually put in effect, and
The
this
last
is what
column.
has
Yes.
the last column is what they put in effect, and everything before that is what has been happening over the last few
Right.
years. Okay.
With West, reason why we're calling it Cuomo's three-card Monte scheme. You know that three-card Monte where they have the three cards and flip it around and hustle you and con you into thinking you're going to win something and you really haven't. So under card 1 is 2008. That is the tax code that was in place prior to the so-called millionaire's tax. Anybody making $40,000 or more, you only got taxed 6.85% by the state. If you're making $40,000 or more, so if Inez was making $40 million and I was making $40,000, we have the same tax. That's wrong. Something very wrong with that. So what we did, in the next column, we said, look, let's fight in 2009 to get them to tax the rich a little more than the working class poor. So in this column, you see, they actually did that. We got those who are making over $500,000 that they would have to pay 8.9%, 8.92. And some of the others went up from 6.8 to 7.8. So when we finish this column, that's what's presently in place now. We get the $5 billion, $4.9 billion. That's what's in place right now. That's what we had last year. So we would be able to then project the 3.5 billion, 4.9, do the math. Simple. We would have an extra, $1.5 billion. What Cuomo did in the third column, he said, look, I'm going to let this end. Last year when Inez and I confronted him at the gala in Albany, 2,000 people joined us in the chant, tax the rich, tax the rich. He said no, because he wanted to lead the charge to make sure this ended, because this is where the rich would have paid a little more. And by this ending, here's the three-card Monte scheme. Then it goes back to 2008, so he makes you think he's taxing the rich when he actually gave them a break. So when you look at his plan, if you look at those who are making over $2 million, they get a reduction. Right. And those who are making from about $300,000 to $300,000 to $2 million, they actually get the largest reduction. 2.12%. The so-called middle class that's making $40,000 to $150,000, 0.0%. That's $200. They get a $200 tax break. And then, because they raising the CUNY tuition $300 per year for the next 5 years, you don't even have enough to pay that. The fare, transit fare is going up. You got food going up,
So they're going
clothing going up.
Paying back anyway because
That's the
there's gonna be
three-card
more
Monty
cuts
scheme.
and
Like
more.
here's
it's not-
$200.
right.
Now next year, because he went from having 4.9 billion, let that die, and now he's introducing 1.9 billion and say, here, Black and Latino caucus, here's $25 million for your youth program. I'm creating jobs for you. Who's stupid? You're not creating nothing. That's the money that you cut out from last year's budget, so you're just restoring that. And then because you're only going to get 1.9 and you have a $3.5 billion deficit next year, you're going to have to cut that back out next year. So he gave it to them this year. They dancing around with him, buck dancing with him, and saying he's some great massa. And next year, he's going to say, you know what? I taxed the rich, so now I got to get you again. And you know what's going to happen next year? Mark my words. Next year, he's going to cut them some more. Next year, he's going to tell the unions, you have to pay more for your health care. He's going to tell the unions, you have to pay more for your pension. He's going to lay off workers. He's going to cut senior citizen programs and daycare centers, all in a state, all in a city that is a country that is the richest country on the planet Earth. When you have a $3.8 trillion state budget and a $134.5 billion state budget, the federal budget was the first one, 3.8 trillion was the federal budget, and a $66 billion city budget, and they're talking about they're broke. I want to be that kind of broke. Break me like that. They have money, but we don't have enough elected officials with the spine to stand up to them and say, we're not going to go for no three-card Monty tax scheme, that we're going to take you on until you do right by our people.
So you were the only council person to vote no on that resolution.
Right, and the
in city
resolution,
council,
that
is
was just
correct?
a ridiculous resolution. The city council actually passed a resolution in committee before he even came out with his plan. They, in spirit, said they are negotiating up in Albany. We're going to pass this in committee before they even read what this plan was going to be. And then after the plan came out, some of them said, oh boy, because I passed this around and said, wow, that's not too cool, Charles. Well, then vote no on the resolution. I can't vote no on the resolution because I'm the author of it, says Jamani Williams and others. You know, it's just crazy that blacks and Latinos, and when I showed them this, all of them said, wow, you know, this makes sense. When I showed them Inez's chart, I gave this to each council member. They looked at it and said, you're right. We went from 4.9 to 1.9 billion, and we're going to be cut next year. You're right. Wow. Well, then vote no. Then vote no. Don't just be startled. Vote no.
Okay, well, with that, we'll take a break. We're going to have another guest join us, Mr. Omowale Clay from the December 12th movement and from the Freedom Party leadership team. And so we'll be back in a moment. Hello and welcome back to Brooklyn Elected Officials. So we have our guest here, Brother Omowale Clay from the December 12th movement and the Freedom Party leadership team. So welcome, Omowale.
Glad to be here.
All right. So I just wanted to quote something about the national level in terms of taxes. And this is an article that was written by Warren Buffett called Stop Coddling the Super Rich. This came out, I think, about a month ago. And what he said was that 17.4% of his taxable income as a billionaire was actually a lower percentage than was paid by any of the other 20 people in his office who were middle class and the lower class individuals. So their tax burdens range from 33% to 41% and averaged 33%. 36%, and again, that was compared to his 17.4%. So this really shows how wealth and income in this nation is pretty much not distributed fairly, as many would say. So can you give us a little bit about that from your perspective in terms of the larger picture of wealth distribution and inequality?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, Warren Buffett is an interesting person because he's laying out what one would think would be a self-criticism of the power and wealth that they have and speaking up for a just tax system. I think one of the things that's very important for us to understand in this period is that the wealth of this country, the most wealthy country in the history of the world, is intact. The country is not broke. There's plenty of money. Two things I think we should make note of. One, the source of all of that wealth, the total unequivocal source of all of that wealth comes from working people. Now the question is, who controls it, who has access to it, who owns it? And then the different kinds of tactics that they use through politics and administration and structure and, as one says in politics, the superstructure to convince people that it's legitimate for them to have it, it's legitimate for them to control it, and it's legitimate for them to dispense it at their pleasure. And so you have someone like a Warren Buffett saying, hold it, hold it, hold it. Let's not take the car to the edge and commit suicide. You almost see a policy like that, internationally on the question of South Africa, where you had a very small minority of people, again, controlling an entire country and reaping the wealth of the labor of those people and fanatical about it. And I remember Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State under Richard Nixon, making the statement that we have to negotiate some redress for these working people, because if not, we'll lose it all. So if we put Warren Buffett in that context, there's always folks usually the super rich, who even like Bill Gates, who turn around and say, we just can't become targets of being callous and insensitive, because we will undermine the very structure that gives us our super wealth. And so let's appear to be benevolent. And these things are done through foundations and such and such, such and such. But I think the connection in terms of our discussion right now, in terms of the chart that was up here, is to convince us, one, that the crisis of capitalism, and that's the system we live under, so I think it's only intelligent that we have an analysis of it. We don't live under something else, that's what we live under, so let's critique that a little bit. That the crisis of capitalism comes from the very nature of the anarchy of the system itself. It's not based on anything that's rational, it's not based on any kind of strategic plan, it's based on a fundamental premise that I have the right and it is the necessity of my actions to acquire as much wealth as possible. And one would say then, why is that such a mandate to do? It's such a mandate to do because the important thing is, at the end of the day, I want to remain standing. And to remain standing, I have to make sure that I have all the chips on my side of the table to do that. So I advance the economy, I retrench the economy, I make different moves with the economy. I send the military out. I send the social institutions out. I send our ideologues out through all of the different forces in society to convince people that I have that right. And as we see with Warren Buffett at different times, we have people saying we're gone too far. We'll lose it all in that sense. So, I think that's a very important point to make.
So just in terms of giving some numbers and connecting to what you're saying, the upper 1% of Americans are now taking in nearly a quarter of the nation's income every year. And in terms of wealth rather than income, the top 1% control 40%. So their lot has improved considerably, improved if that's the word we want to use, because only 25 years ago, the corresponding figures were 12% and 33%. So in terms of the growing inequality, what can you say about that?
Well, I think people, I think people in this country,
so we could just...
I think people know that The old saying, the rich get richer, the poor get poor. That's not an idiom, and that's not an idea that people don't have. I think what we've really not failed to do in terms of our own educational system and in terms of the different institutions in this country, one is to blind us to a fundamental reality that the pursuit of capitalists for maximum profit, not rational, not equal, not reasonable, but maximum profit is what drives things. And it's anarchistic, which is why you have these cyclical crises coming and going and coming and going, and they're really running out of steam in terms of that. And so they spend a great amount of time convincing people that what they're doing is legitimate. Hey, let me give you a little horror story. Today on television, they had a story of a man and a woman. He was an auto worker in Detroit. He lost his job. His daughter had cancer. End result was they had to spend their life savings. They had $100,000. I think that's interesting. But to heal their daughter, okay, because there's no national health care. And so they gave up all of their daggone savings, and the end result was that they got evicted from their home. They lived in a friend's secondary home, and that was their situation. Along comes the Today Show and Walmart to say, we're going to lift this person up as a symbol of the generosity and humanity of American capitalism. So what did they do? They brought the woman to Walmart and told her that she could go shop and get anything in there she wanted. So of course she went and got her electronic equipment, got her husband a 55-inch television, and da-da-da-da-da. And then after they got all of that stuff, they went to the house and they decorated the house. And then after that, they told them that ongoingly they were going to have a stipend that they would get and that their children would be assured of a stipend too. So there's the American family, or part of that structure or symbol of the American family, crying because they're so happy and they feel so blessed. But the real distraction is, in a situation like that, a company like Walmart is the ones who's actually driving them out of their homes and out of their houses. So they use television and use these different institutions to portray themselves as being benevolent and to take what are really systemic issues, issues of systems, and turn them into individual personal issues. So now you're being tugged at your heart at how beneficial it was for this family to lift themselves up, but more importantly, Walmart is really not that bad, you know, in terms of that. So we have these kind of things and scenarios going on, and I think in this period, as a period during the Great Depression in the 30s and stuff, with people out of work at record numbers, I think it's important to note that it's time for us to really do a self-check, or as young people say, a mic check on what's really going on, and to understand that this system is decaying, is collapsing, and we have to come with a strategy for our survival.
All right. Well, we only have 1 minute left, so we could just get 2 20-second statements in closing.
Yes, thank you, first of all, for bringing this issue to light. And I just want to say that as we go forward into next year's budget, I'm demanding that the governor adhere to the court's requirement that an additional $3.8 billion be given to the educational programs in New York City.
Right.
And I say, like Dr. Martin Luther King says, this system needs a radical change from the structure of it. The 1% better beware of the 99%. And we are 99% of the 99%, because we're coming.
All right. Well, thank you. And we're going to be back. We're going to have Councilman Barron and Inez Barron and other guests back. And it was a very wonderful and informative session. Thank you. And thanks to all our guests. Have a good day.
Watch this and other Brooklyn Independent Television episodes online at breakartsmedia.org/BIT.